The year is 1584, and Japan bleeds. For over a century, the archipelago has been torn apart by endless war. Daimyo battle daimyo, clan destroys clan, and the common people huddle in their villages, praying the next army that passes will not burn their homes. This is the Sengoku period, the age of warring states, where only the strong survive and the weak are trampled beneath the hooves of war horses. In this world of chaos, the sword is everything. It is law, justice, survival, and honor, all wrapped in folded steel. Men live and die by their blades, and those who master the art of killing rise to heights unimaginable to farmers and merchants. The samurai class has reached its bloody zenith, their code of Bushido, both noble ideal and brutal reality. A warrior's worth is measured not in rice or gold, but in the speed of his draw and the keenness of his edge. Yet even in this maelstrom of violence, change whispers on the wind. Toyotomi Hideyoshi has begun the great work of unification, conquering province after province, bringing order through overwhelming force. The old ways, the ancient freedom of the warrior to choose his master, to wander the roads seeking worthy opponents. These traditions are slowly being strangled by the iron fist of centralized power. Soon, very soon, there will be no more wars to fight, no more enemies to face in honorable combat. But you do not know this yet. You are barely born, a crying infant in the province of Harima, son to a man named Munisai, who has already made his reputation with sword and spear. Your birth name is Benosuke, though history will know you by another name entirely. You enter a world where violence is not an aberration, but a way of life, where children learn to kill before they learn to write, where the difference between hero and monster is often nothing more than which side emerges victorious. In the villages around your birthplace, old men gather in sake houses to tell stories of legendary warriors. They speak of Yamamoto Kansuke, the one-eyed strategist who served the Takeda clan until death claimed him at Kawanakajima. They whisper of Tsukahara Bokuden, the sword saint who killed countless opponents, yet claimed to have perfected the art of winning without fighting. These tales fire young imaginations, painting pictures of glory and honor that seem impossibly distant from the mundane struggle of daily survival. Your father understands this world better than most. Munisai is not merely a swordsman, but a complete warrior, master of the blade, the spear, and the subtle art of jita, the iron truncheon used to catch and break enemy weapons. He has felt the weight of a katana in his hands since childhood, has seen friends die screaming on battlefields, has learned that in the space between heartbeats, everything can change: victory and defeat, life and death, honor and shame, all balanced on the razor's edge of skill and fortune. The Japan you are born into is a land of contradictions. Beautiful beyond description, with its mist-shrouded mountains and cherry blossoms that bloom like scattered snow. Yet soaked in blood from generations of warfare, ancient traditions of poetry and tea ceremony exist alongside the brutal practicalities of siege warfare and single combat. Buddhist temples offer sanctuary and wisdom, while training warrior monks who fight with deadly skill. This is a culture that has elevated both the art of killing and the pursuit of enlightenment to heights unknown elsewhere in the world. As you grow from infant to child, you will witness the end of one age and the birth of another. The Sengoku period is dying, though its death throes will echo for decades. Soon, Tokugawa Ieyasu will triumph at Sekigahara, establishing a peace that will last for centuries. The age of the wandering warrior, the masterless samurai seeking his fortune on the point of his sword, will become nothing more than legend and nostalgia. But legends must be lived before they can be told. Heroes must walk their paths before bards can sing their songs. And somewhere in the hills of Harima province, a child is learning to hold a wooden sword, taking his first steps on a journey that will make his name immortal. The way of the sword is calling, and you, though you do not yet know it, will answer that call more completely than any warrior who ever lived. Your story begins now, in blood and steel, in honor and violence, in the crucible of an age that is passing away forever. You will become Miyamoto Musashi, the sword saint, the author of the Book of Five Rings, the man who perfected the art of killing and transformed it into a path to wisdom. But first, you must survive your childhood in a world where weakness means death, and strength is the only virtue that truly matters. The morning mist clings to the hills of Harima province like the breath of sleeping dragons. You are 5 years old, and your small hands wrap around the hilt of a wooden practice sword that feels impossibly heavy. Your father Munisai stands before you in the courtyard of your family's modest estate, his own bokken held with the casual grace of a man who has spent decades perfecting his craft. The sun has barely risen, but your training has already begun. Again, he says, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You raise the wooden blade, struggling to maintain the proper grip, the correct stance, the precise angle of your shoulders that he has drilled into you through countless repetitions. This is not play. This is survival. Japan in the 1580s offers no gentle childhood for the son of a warrior. While merchant children might learn their numbers and farmers' sons help tend rice paddies, you are being forged into a weapon from your earliest memories. The Sengoku period has created a generation for whom violence is not an unfortunate necessity, but a sacred calling. Your father knows what kind of world you will inherit, one where a moment's hesitation or a poorly executed technique can mean the difference between honor and ignominy, between life and death. The wooden sword trembles in your grip as you attempt the basic overhead strike Munisai has shown you 100 times before your muscles, still soft with youth, protest the unfamiliar demands being placed upon them. But there is something else stirring within you as the bokken cuts through the morning air, something that your father recognizes with a mixture of pride and concern. You are not struggling because you dislike this training. You are struggling because you hunger for it with an intensity that seems almost unnatural in one so young. Picture yourself now, sweat beading on your forehead despite the cool morning air, your small body trembling with effort and excitement. The world around you is alive with the sounds of a province still touched by war. The distant clatter of horses' hooves as samurai retainers patrol the roads, the rhythmic striking of hammers as smiths forge new blades, the occasional boom of arquebus fire as soldiers practice with the foreign weapons that are slowly changing the face of Japanese warfare. But you hear none of it. Your universe has contracted to the space between you and your father, to the weight of wood in your hands, to the burning need to prove yourself worthy of the warrior's path. Years pass in this manner, the seasons turn, bringing cherry blossoms and autumn leaves, summer festivals and winter snows, but your routine never varies. Dawn finds you in the courtyard with your bokken, working through kata after kata until your movements become as natural as breathing. You learn not just the techniques of swordsmanship, but the philosophy behind them. The understanding that a warrior must be more than merely skilled with his blade. Munisai teaches you calligraphy and basic strategy, the fundamentals of horsemanship and the proper way to wear armor. But always, you return to the sword. By age 8, you can execute the basic cuts and thrusts with a precision that would be remarkable in a boy twice your age. By 10, you have begun to develop your own subtle variations on the classical forms, innovations that your father notes with growing interest. There is something different about you, something that sets you apart from the other warrior children in the province, where they practice dutifully but long for the games and pleasures of youth. You seem to find genuine joy in the ring of steel on steel, in the perfect execution of a technique that can split a skull or pierce a heart. Your first taste of real violence comes when you are 12. A masterless samurai, a ronin whose lord has fallen in some distant battle, arrives at your father's estate seeking shelter and a meal. Such men are common in these troubled times, warriors cast adrift by the endless upheavals of war. Some honorable and seeking legitimate service, others little better than bandits who prey upon the weak. This one falls into the latter category. The ronin is drunk on cheap sake and bitter with defeat. He sees your father's comfortable home, his well-maintained weapons, his reputation as a martial artist, and his resentment boils over into challenge. Perhaps he believes that defeating a respected local warrior will restore his fortunes. Perhaps he simply wants to hurt someone weaker than the enemies who destroyed his previous life. His motivations matter little. What matters is that he draws his katana in your family's courtyard and demands satisfaction. You watch from the shadows of the house as your father accepts the challenge with the weary resignation of a man who has faced such situations too many times before. There is no ceremony, no formal ritual of honor. This is not a sanctioned duel between equals, but the desperate strike of a broken man against a target of convenience. Musashi draws his own blade with fluid economy of motion, settling into a guard position that speaks of decades of experience. The fight lasts perhaps 10 seconds. The Ronin attacks with the wild aggression of desperation, bringing his sword down in a crude overhead slash that might cleave a man from crown to groin if it connects. But it doesn't connect. Your father steps aside with minimal effort, letting the heavier blade whistle harmlessly past his shoulder, then drives his own katana upward in a single precise thrust that finds the gap beneath the Ronin's ribs and pierces his heart. You see it all, the moment when confidence becomes confusion in the stranger's eyes, the spray of bright arterial blood that paints the courtyard stones, the way the man's legs simply stop working as death takes him. Your father withdraws his blade and cleans it with calm efficiency, while the Ronin's body settles into the stillness that is the final destination of all warriors. There is no triumph in Musashi's expression, no satisfaction at his victory. There is only the professional competence of a craftsman who has completed a necessary task. That night, as servants dispose of the body and wash the blood from the stones, your father finds you sitting alone in the garden. The moon is full, casting everything in silver light that makes the familiar landscape seem strange and magical. You have been thinking about what you witnessed, turning it over in your young mind, like a puzzle with pieces that don't quite fit together. You saw, Musashi says. It is not a question. Yes, honored father. And what did you think of it? You consider the question carefully. At 12, you are old enough to understand the weight of words, the importance of speaking truthfully to a man who has just demonstrated the ultimate consequence of poor judgment. I thought it was beautiful, you finally say. Musashi is quiet for a long moment, studying your face in the moonlight. Other children might have been horrified by their first sight of violent death, might have needed comfort or reassurance, but you speak of beauty, and he understands exactly what you mean. The perfect execution of technique, the economy of motion, the way skill and preparation triumphed over passion and desperation. There was indeed a kind of beauty in it, though it was a beauty that most people would never understand or appreciate. That man died because he made poor choices, your father says finally. He challenged an opponent without understanding his capabilities. He attacked with emotion rather than strategy. He allowed desperation to cloud his judgment. Will I have to kill men like that someday? If you follow the warrior's path, and I believe you will, despite any choice I might make for you, then yes, you will face many such men. Some will be better than he was. Some will be much worse. A few will be better than me. And someday, inevitably, you will face someone better than you. The words hang in the night air like an incantation, a prophecy that will shape the course of your life. You are 12 years old, and you have just received the most important lesson any warrior can learn, that the path you are choosing leads inevitably to death, either dealing it or receiving it. Most children would find such knowledge terrifying, but as you sit in your father's garden under the full moon, listening to the night sounds of insects and distant wolves, you feel not fear, but anticipation. The way of the sword is calling to you, and you are eager to answer. You are 13 when you kill your first man. The memory will follow you for the rest of your days, not as a burden of guilt, but as the moment when your transformation from student to warrior became irreversible. The duel takes place on a humid summer morning in the town of Hirafuku, where a traveling martial artist named Arima Kihei, has been challenging local fighters and winning easily. His technique is solid, his confidence absolute, and he makes the fatal mistake of accepting a challenge from what appears to be a gangly farm boy with delusions of martial skill. The fight happens fast. Kihei comes at you with a powerful overhead strike, the same technique that has defeated a dozen local warriors. But where they saw an unstoppable attack, you see an opening. Your father's training has taught you to read an opponent's intentions in the subtle shift of his shoulders, the positioning of his feet, the angle of his blade. As Kihei's sword descends, you step not backward but forward and to the side, bringing your own wooden practice sword up in a rising strike that catches him in the temple with devastating force. He drops like a stone. The crack of wood against skull echoes across the makeshift fighting ground, followed by absolute silence from the gathered crowd. You stand over the body, breathing hard, the bokken still trembling in your grip. Kihei's eyes stare sightlessly at the summer sky, and you realize with cold certainty that you have crossed a threshold from which there can be no return. You are no longer a student of the martial arts. You are a killer. The years that follow blur together in a haze of constant travel and endless challenges. At 15, you leave your father's house to begin your Musashi, the warrior's pilgrimage that every serious martial artist must undertake to test his skills against the masters of other schools and fighting styles. Japan's roads are filled with such wanderers, masterless samurai seeking employment or enlightenment, or simply the next worthy opponent. Some are legitimate warriors following ancient tradition. Others are little better than bandits who use martial skill to prey upon the weak. You quickly learn to tell the difference. Your reputation grows with each victory. The boy who killed Arima Kihei becomes the young man who defeated the master of the Shinto Ryu school, then the warrior who single-handedly fought off 6 bandits on the Tokaido road, then the swordsman who could not be beaten in any fair fight. By the time you reach 17, there are songs being sung about you in taverns, stories being told around campfires. You have become something larger than merely human. A living legend walking the dusty roads of a country tearing itself apart. The year 1600 brings both opportunity and disaster. Toyotomi Hideyoshi has been dead for 2 years, and his young heir Hideyori lacks the strength to hold the fragile coalition of daimyo together. 2 great factions have emerged. Those who support the Toyotomi cause, led by the cunning Ishida Mitsunari, and those who have thrown their lot in with Tokugawa Ieyasu, the patient spider who has been weaving his web of alliances for decades. War is inevitable, and every warrior in Japan must choose a side. You choose poorly. Perhaps it is youthful idealism that draws you to the Toyotomi faction, or perhaps you simply prefer the odds of fighting for the underdog. The Tokugawa forces seem overwhelmingly powerful, backed by the wealth of the Kanto Plain and the loyalty of Japan's most experienced generals. Fighting for the losing side appeals to something deep in your warrior's soul, the desire to prove that individual skill can triumph over superior numbers and resources. The armies gather at Sekigahara, a narrow valley in the mountains where the great roads of central Japan converge. You have never seen so many warriors in one place. Tens of thousands of samurai in their lacquered armor, their banners streaming in the autumn wind, their weapons glinting like deadly flowers in the morning sun. This is the culmination of everything the Sengoku period has been building toward, the final battle that will determine the future of Japan. Picture yourself now, 17 years old, standing among the ranks of the Western Army as the mist rises from the valley floor. Your armor is lighter than most, your weapons simple but perfectly maintained. Around you, veteran samurai prepare for what they know will be either their greatest triumph or their final battle. The air crackles with nervous energy, with the electric anticipation that comes before men attempt to kill one another on an industrial scale. You can smell the fierce sweat of the horses, the oil used to prevent rust on armor, the incense that many warriors burn before battle to purify their souls. Your heart pounds against your ribs, but your breathing remains steady and controlled. This is what you have trained for your entire life, not the pageantry and ritual of formal duels, but the raw chaos of battlefield combat, where only the strong and the lucky survive. Then the battle begins, and your world explodes into noise and violence beyond anything you could have imagined. The clash of armies at Sekigahara is not the elegant dance of individual combat, but a writhing mass of screaming men and terrified horses, of spears and arrows and the thunder of arquebus fire. You find yourself swept along in charges that achieve nothing, trapped in desperate melees where friend and enemy become indistinguishable in the press of bodies and the spray of blood. The Western Army's battle plan collapses within hours. Kobayakawa, Hideaki's forces on Mount Matsuo, refuse to engage, leaving the Toyotomi center exposed. Betrayals cascade through the ranks as clan after clan switches sides or simply withdraws from the field. You watch in stunned disbelief as the coalition your side depends on dissolves like morning mist, leaving you and the remaining loyalists vastly outnumbered and fighting for their lives. The moment of defeat comes suddenly. One instant you are part of an army, the next you are running for your life through the narrow mountain passes. Your beautiful armor abandoned on the field, your pride shattered along with your side's hopes. The Tokugawa victory is so complete, so overwhelming, that it seems almost supernatural, as if the gods themselves have chosen sides in this conflict. You spend the next several days hiding in the mountains, surviving on berries and stream water, watching from concealment as Tokugawa forces hunt down the survivors of the Western Army. Some are captured and executed. Others are forced to commit seppuku to preserve their honor. A few, like you, simply vanish into the vast wilderness of rural Japan, becoming ghosts of a defeated cause. When you finally emerge from hiding, you are no longer the same person who marched confidently to Sekigahara. The boy who believed that individual skill could overcome any obstacle has been replaced by a young man who understands the brutal realities of power and politics. You are now truly Ronin, masterless, landless, with nothing but your swords and your skill to sustain you in a world that has suddenly become much more dangerous. The new Tokugawa order has no place for warriors like you, men whose loyalty was to the wrong cause and whose very existence is a reminder of the regime's recent vulnerability. But you are still alive, still undefeated in single combat, still hungry for the next challenge. The defeat at Sekigahara has not broken you. It has forged you into something harder and more dangerous than you ever were before. You walk the roads of a Japan you no longer recognize, a country transforming itself from chaos into order, from war into peace. The age of the wandering warrior is ending, but you do not know this yet. You know only that somewhere out there are opponents worthy of your steel, masters whose defeat will add to your growing legend. The way of the sword still calls to you, perhaps more urgently now that everything else has been stripped away. Your real journey is just beginning. The early years of the new century find you haunting the highways and byways of a Japan struggling to understand itself. The Tokugawa peace is taking hold, but slowly, like scar tissue forming over a wound that refuses to heal cleanly. Masterless samurai like yourself wander the countryside in growing numbers, men trained for war in an age that no longer has need of their particular skills. Some become bandits. Others find employment as bodyguards or mercenaries. A precious few discover that their martial abilities can be transformed into something more sophisticated. Instruction in the arts of strategy and combat for those wealthy enough to afford such luxury. You choose a different path entirely. Where other Ronin seek patrons or easy prey, you hunt for something far more dangerous and valuable, masters whose skills exceed your own. Each province has its legendary fighters, schools of swordsmanship that trace their lineages back centuries. Techniques passed down from father to son or teacher to student in unbroken chains of knowledge. You systematically challenge them all. The pattern becomes ritualized, almost ceremonial. You arrive at a dojo or training hall, present yourself formally to the master, and request instruction through the time-honored method of armed combat. Some refuse, recognizing the reputation that precedes you like a shadow. Others accept, confident in their own abilities or simply unable to refuse a direct challenge without losing face. The results are always the same: another victory to add to your growing legend, another technique absorbed and incorporated into your ever-evolving style. It is during these wandering years that you begin to develop the innovation that will become your trademark. Traditional Japanese swordsmanship focuses on the katana, the long sword that is both weapon and symbol of the samurai class masters. Spend decades perfecting their draw, their cuts, their defensive positions with this single blade. But you have begun to experiment with something different, something that strikes classically trained warriors as either revolutionary or heretical depending on their perspective. Picture yourself in the mountains of Yamato province, practicing alone in a clearing where ancient pines stretch toward a sky the color of winter steel. In your hands are two swords, the traditional katana in your right hand, and in your left, the shorter wakizashi that normally serves as a backup weapon or a tool for seppuku. You have been working for months to develop the coordination necessary to wield both blades simultaneously, to find the rhythm that will make two swords move as one. The breakthrough comes suddenly, like lightning splitting the darkness of a summer storm. You are working through a complex series of cuts and parries when something clicks into place. A perfect moment of balance and timing that makes the twin blades feel like extensions of your own body. Your left hand sweeps the wakizashi in a defensive arc, while your right drives the katana toward an imaginary opponent's throat. The two weapons complement each other perfectly, each covering the weaknesses of the other, creating patterns of attack and defense that no single sword fighter could match. You step back, breathing hard, exhilarated by the discovery. This is it, the innovation that will set you apart from every other swordsman in Japan. Not just superior technique with traditional weapons, but an entirely new approach to armed combat. You have created something that has never existed before, a fighting style that transforms the ancient art of swordsmanship into something altogether more deadly. The years that follow are a blur of constant refinement and testing. You seek out masters of every conceivable weapon, not just swords, but spears and polearms, chain weapons and throwing implements, even the exotic fighting arts imported from China and Korea. Each encounter teaches you something new, adds another layer to your understanding of combat and strategy. You begin to see patterns that other warriors miss, connections between seemingly unrelated techniques, opportunities hidden within the orthodox methods of established schools. Your reputation spreads like ripples on a pond. The young swordsman who uses two blades becomes the subject of increasingly elaborate stories, each telling growing in the space between truth and legend. You are said to be unbeatable in single combat, capable of defeating multiple opponents simultaneously, possessed of supernatural speed and strength. Some of these stories are true. Others are the inevitable exaggerations that accumulate around any figure who captures the public imagination. You encourage neither the truth nor the fiction. Your swords speak louder than words, and your victories require no embellishment. By your 20th year, you have begun to attract students, young warriors who seek to learn the mysterious two-sword style that has made you famous throughout central Japan. Teaching forces you to articulate ideas that have previously existed only as instinct and muscle memory. You discover that swordsmanship is not merely about physical technique, but about understanding the deeper principles that govern all conflict: timing, distance, psychology, the ability to read an opponent's intentions in the moment before he acts upon them. One of your early students is an earnest young samurai named Terao Magonojo, whose clan has been destroyed in the political upheavals following Sekigahara. He comes to you with decent basic skills, but no real understanding of what separates competent technique from true mastery. Under your guidance, he begins to glimpse the deeper mysteries of martial arts, the way that perfect technique transcends mere physical movement to become a kind of meditation in motion. Master, he asks you one evening as you both sit beside a campfire on the slopes of Mount Fuji, how does one know when they have achieved true skill with the sword? You consider the question while staring into the flames, watching the way they dance and flicker according to invisible currents of air. When you no longer think about the sword, you finally say, when the blade becomes an extension of your will, no more conscious than your heartbeat or the movement of your breath. When you can fight without fighting, win without conquering. The young man frowns, struggling to understand concepts that exist at the edge of language. But surely there must be enemies to defeat, techniques to perfect. There are always enemies, you agree, but the greatest enemy is yourself, your own limitations, your own ignorance, your own attachment to ideas about how things should be, rather than acceptance of how they are. Defeat that enemy, and all others become manageable. These philosophical discussions mark a new phase in your development. Where once you were content simply to win, now you seek to understand why you win. What are the principles that govern successful combat? How can these principles be applied beyond the narrow realm of swordsmanship? You begin to see connections between martial arts and other areas of human endeavor: business, politics, art, even romance. The strategies that work in single combat, you realize, have applications in any situation where conflict and competition are involved. It is during this period of intense study and reflection that you first hear rumors of a warrior whose reputation may equal or even exceed your own. His name is Sasaki Kojiro, and he is said to be the finest swordsman in all of Japan. Unlike you, he follows the traditional path of single sword mastery, wielding a nodachi, a blade longer than any katana, with devastating effectiveness. His signature technique, the turning swallow cut, is supposedly capable of killing a bird in flight. More importantly, he has never been defeated in formal combat, a record that mirrors your own. The idea of facing such an opponent fills you with an excitement you haven't felt since your earliest days as a wandering warrior. Here, finally, is a challenge worthy of your evolved skills. Here is an enemy who might actually force you to grow beyond your current limitations. The thought of that confrontation, two masters at the peak of their abilities, matched in single combat with everything on the line, becomes an obsession that drives you through the long months of preparation that must precede such an encounter. But first, there are other tests to face, other masters to defeat. Your path to legendary status requires you to prove yourself against every significant fighter in Japan, to demonstrate beyond question that your innovations in swordsmanship are not mere novelty, but genuine advancement in the art of war. The most prestigious target available is the Yoshioka School in Kyoto, a martial arts academy with a pedigree stretching back generations and a reputation for producing some of Japan's finest warriors. It is time to test your two-sword style against the accumulated wisdom of centuries. It is time to prove that innovation can triumph over tradition, that individual genius can overcome institutional authority. The road to Kyoto beckons, and with it, the next chapter in your transformation from wandering swordsman to legendary master. Your true trials are about to begin. Kyoto in the early 1600s remains the beating heart of Japanese culture, even as political power has shifted to Edo under the Tokugawa regime. Here, beneath the shadow of the imperial palace, ancient traditions persist with stubborn dignity. Tea masters perfect their ceremonies in hidden gardens. Poets compose verses that capture the melancholy beauty of cherry blossoms falling like snow. And in a prestigious compound near the Rendaiji Temple, the Yoshioka family maintains the most exclusive sword school in all Japan. The Yoshioka Ryu is not merely a martial arts academy, it is an institution, a guardian of orthodox swordsmanship that traces its lineage back to the legendary Yoshioka. Kempo, for generations, the finest warriors have studied here, learning techniques passed down in unbroken succession from master to student. The school's reputation is so formidable that a certificate of graduation from the Yoshioka Academy is considered more valuable than gold, more prestigious than appointment to high office. To challenge the Yoshioka is to challenge tradition itself. You arrive in Kyoto on a morning when autumn mist clings to the ancient rooftops, like the ghosts of defeated armies. Your appearance is deliberately provocative. Travel-stained hakama, swords worn in the practical manner of a working warrior rather than the ceremonial style favored by court samurai, hair tied back with a simple cord rather than arranged in elaborate top knots. You look like exactly what you are. A ronin from the provinces, a masterless wanderer with no credentials beyond the reputation that precedes him like wildfire. The current head of the Yoshioka school is Yoshioka Seijuro, a man in his early 30s who combines genuine martial skill with the confidence that comes from a lifetime of unchallenged supremacy. He has heard the stories about the two-sword fighter, of course. Such tales travel quickly in the insular world of professional warriors, but he dismisses them as the usual exaggerations that accumulate around any successful provincial fighter. When you present yourself at the gates of his academy requesting a match, his initial reaction is amused condescension. "So you are the famous Miyamoto Musashi," he says, using the name by which you have become known throughout Japan. No longer Benosuke the farm boy, but something larger and more mythical. I have heard interesting stories about your innovations in swordsmanship. You bow with the precise formality required by etiquette, neither too deep nor too shallow, acknowledging his status without showing subservience. "I am merely a student seeking instruction, honored master. I would be grateful for the opportunity to test my poor skills against the techniques of your distinguished school." The ritualized exchange continues for several minutes, both participants following a dance of courtesy that disguises the deadly seriousness of what is being negotiated. Finally, Seijuro agrees to a formal match, to take place the following morning at a grove of pine trees outside the city. The weapons will be bokken, wooden practice swords. But both men understand that wooden weapons can kill as easily as steel when wielded with sufficient force and precision. That night, you sit alone in a modest inn, preparing for battle in the way that has become second nature through years of constant conflict. You meditate on the coming fight, visualizing every possible angle of attack and defense, imagining the feel of wood against wood, the moment when superior technique will assert itself over orthodox training. Your two swords lie beside you, their presence as comforting as the breathing of a sleeping friend. Picture the scene now as dawn breaks over the appointed meeting place. The pine grove is ancient and sacred, its trees so tall they seem to pierce the low-hanging clouds. Seijuro arrives with a retinue of students and fellow masters, men who have come to witness what they expect will be the humbling of an arrogant upstart. You come alone, carrying only your weapons and your reputation. The formal preliminaries are brief. Both fighters bow to each other, and to the assembled witnesses, Seijuro draws his bokken, a weapon crafted from the finest oak, its balance and weight perfected through centuries of use. You draw both of your wooden swords, ignoring the murmurs of surprise and disapproval from the watching crowd. Two swords may be practical, their expressions suggest, but they are hardly sporting. The fight begins with cautious circling, each warrior taking the measure of his opponent. Seijuro moves with the fluid grace of classical training, his technique flawless according to the orthodox principles of his school. But you can see the subtle signs of overconfidence in his stance, the assumptions built into his defensive posture. He has prepared to fight a conventional opponent, using conventional methods. What he faces instead is something entirely new. Your attack, when it comes, is unlike anything in the Yoshioka curriculum. The wakizashi in your left hand sweeps toward Seijuro's head, while the katana in your right drives toward his midsection. Two simultaneous threats that cannot be countered by any single defensive technique. He attempts to block the high attack, leaving himself vulnerable to the low, then tries to adjust his defense, only to find that you have already moved on to a different combination entirely. The end comes with shocking suddenness. Seijuro attempts a classical overhead cut, the same technique that has served him faithfully in hundreds of training sessions. But as his sword descends, your crossed blades rise to meet it. Not to block, but to trap and redirect. The wooden weapons lock together for an instant, and in that moment of contact, you demonstrate the fundamental advantage of fighting with two swords. While Seijuro's single blade is committed to the engagement, your secondary weapon remains free to strike. The wakizashi in your left hand finds the gap between Seijuro's raised arms, striking him precisely in the solar plexus with force sufficient to drive all the air from his lungs and send him crashing to the pine needle carpet. He lies there gasping like a landed fish, his face purple with the effort to breathe, while you stand over him with both swords still at the ready. The match is over. The legend of Yoshioka invincibility has been shattered in less than a minute of actual combat. But this is only the beginning. Word of Seijuro's defeat spreads through Kyoto like fire through dry grass, carrying with it implications that extend far beyond a single martial arts contest. The Yoshioka school's reputation has been built over centuries, its authority taken as absolute by everyone from wealthy merchants to imperial courtiers. Your victory doesn't merely demonstrate superior technique, it calls into question the entire foundation upon which traditional swordsmanship rests. Seijuro's younger brother, Yoshioka Denshichiro, cannot allow such a challenge to stand unanswered. He is younger than his sibling, more aggressive, driven by a fury that makes him dangerous in ways that pure technical skill cannot match. When he issues his challenge 3 days later, you accept without hesitation. This time, the weapons will be real steel, and the stakes have escalated beyond questions of martial supremacy to matters of honor that can only be settled with blood. The second duel takes place at dawn in the courtyard of a Buddhist temple, its stone lanterns casting long shadows across raked gravel. Denshichiro arrives early, wearing the formal hakama of a samurai preparing for death, his katana polished to mirror brightness. His eyes hold the wild light of a man who has moved beyond rational calculation into the realm of pure emotion. This makes him more dangerous than his brother, but also more predictable. You study him as you both assume fighting stances, reading the subtle signs that telegraph his internal state. Anger narrows vision, makes fighters commit to attacks before they have properly assessed the tactical situation. Denshichiro's rage at his brother's humiliation is a weapon you can use against him if you remain calm enough to exploit the openings it will create. The temple bell tolls once, signaling the beginning of combat. Denshichiro explodes into motion with the fury of a charging boar, his sword whistling through the air in a series of cuts designed to overwhelm through sheer ferocity. But you have faced angry opponents before, have learned to remain centered in the eye of their emotional storms. Your twin blades weave around his attacks like water flowing around stones, never quite where he expects them to be. The killing stroke comes when Denshichiro overextends himself in a particularly vicious overhead cut, leaving his entire left side exposed. Your katana slides between his ribs like a key turning in a lock, finding his heart with surgical precision. He stands motionless for a moment, his expression shifting from rage to surprise to the peaceful emptiness that comes with understanding that death has arrived. Then he falls, his blood staining the temple's sacred gravel. 2 brothers dead. The Yoshioka school's leadership eliminated. But the institution itself still exists, still commands the loyalty of dozens of students and instructors who cannot accept that their entire worldview has been proven false by a wandering ronin with unconventional techniques. The challenge that comes next is unlike anything you have faced before. Not a formal duel between equals, but something much more primitive and desperate. The remaining Yoshioka fighters, led by the school's senior instructors, issue a mass challenge. They will meet you at the Pine Grove, where you defeated Seijuro. But this time you will face not one opponent, but dozens. They claim this is legitimate according to ancient precedent, that a challenger who destroys a school's leadership must prove himself against its entire membership. In reality, it is an assassination attempt disguised as a martial arts contest, a coordinated effort to destroy you through weight of numbers. You should refuse. Any rational warrior would recognize the trap and decline to spring it. But rationality has never been your defining characteristic. What drives you is something deeper and more dangerous: the need to test yourself against impossible odds, to discover the absolute limits of skill and will. If the Yoshioka want to end this with overwhelming force, you will give them the fight they seek. Picture yourself now on the morning of that final confrontation, walking alone through the streets of Kyoto as the city awakens around you. Your swords rest easy in their scabbards, your breathing remains steady and controlled, but inside your chest, something wild and predatory has awakened. This is not mere combat anymore. This is war, stripped of all pretense and reduced to its essential elements. They want to kill you, and you are going to kill them instead. The pine grove is crowded with Yoshioka fighters when you arrive, perhaps 30 men arranged in a loose semicircle around the clearing where you defeated their first master. They carry a mixture of weapons: katana, wakizashi, naginata, even a few arquebus for those who prefer to kill from a distance. Their plan is obvious: overwhelm you with simultaneous attacks from multiple directions, use their numerical advantage to compensate for any deficiency in individual skill. What they have not considered is that fighting multiple opponents simultaneously is not merely a matter of multiplying single combat by the number of enemies involved. It is an entirely different kind of warfare, one that rewards different attributes and requires different strategies. Where formal dueling emphasizes precision and technique, mass combat rewards aggression, mobility, and the psychological ability to inspire fear in one's enemies. The battle begins when one of the younger students, his nerve finally breaking under the weight of anticipation, charges forward with a wild war cry. His katana cleaves the air where your head was an instant before, but you have already moved, flowing like water into the space between him and his nearest companion. Your twin blades work with mechanical precision, the katana taking the first student in the throat, the wakizashi opening the second man's belly in a spray of blood and viscera. Then the real fight begins. The remaining Yoshioka fighters surge forward in a confused mass, their careful formations collapsing into chaos as they struggle to engage an enemy who refuses to remain stationary long enough to be surrounded. You move through them like a typhoon, striking and spinning away before they can coordinate their response, using their own numbers against them by forcing them to obstruct each other's attacks. Your swords drink deeply of blood that morning. Men fall screaming around you, their elaborate techniques useless against the savage practicality of two-sword combat, optimized for battlefield conditions rather than formal dueling. You fight with a joy that borders on ecstasy, every sense heightened to supernatural clarity, every movement flowing naturally from the one before. This is what you were born for, not the careful ritual of single combat, but the magnificent chaos of life and death played out on the ultimate stage. When the last Yoshioka fighter falls, you stand alone in a grove transformed into an abattoir. Bodies lie scattered among the ancient pines like broken dolls, their blood soaking into soil that will remember this violence long after the names of the combatants are forgotten. You are wounded in a dozen places, cuts and thrusts that found their mark despite your speed and skill. But none of them are mortal. You have survived something that should have been impossible, have proven that individual excellence can indeed triumph over institutional authority. The Yoshioka school dies with its fighters that day. The few students who were not present for the final battle either flee Kyoto or seek instruction elsewhere, unwilling to be associated with an academy whose reputation has been so thoroughly destroyed. The buildings that housed centuries of tradition are abandoned, left to decay like the dreams of orthodoxy they once represented. You walk away from the pine grove knowing that you have crossed another threshold, moved another step closer to something that transcends mere martial skill. The boy who learned swordsmanship in his father's courtyard is gone, replaced by a force of nature that bends the world to its will through pure application of violence. But even as you savor this victory, you understand that it is incomplete. The Yoshioka were skilled, but they were not the ultimate test. Somewhere in Japan, Sasaki Kojiro continues his own journey toward mastery, honing techniques that may prove superior to your own innovations. That confrontation still awaits, still calls to you across the miles like a siren song of destiny. The greatest duel in history has yet to be fought, and when it comes, it will determine not just who lives and who dies, but what the art of swordsmanship itself will become. Your legend grows with each step you take away from Kyoto, each mile that carries you closer to that ultimate test. The years between the Yoshioka massacre and your encounter with Sasaki Kojiro pass like scenes from a dream half remembered upon waking. You wander Japan's highways as both hunter and hunted, seeking worthy opponents while being sought by those who would build their own reputations on your defeat. Your name has become something larger than merely human, a byword for martial excellence that inspires equal measures of admiration and terror. Mothers frighten children with stories of the two-sword demon. Young warriors practice their techniques while imagining the day they might face you in combat. You have transcended the boundaries of flesh and blood to become a living myth. But myths, you are beginning to understand, can be prisons as much as they are sources of power. The constant challenges grow tedious, repetitive affairs against opponents who seek glory rather than genuine improvement in their art. You defeat them all, of course, some quickly, others after brief but decisive encounters that add to your legend without adding to your understanding. It has been years since you faced an enemy who could truly test your abilities, years since combat carried any real risk of failure. You are beginning to wonder if such an opponent even exists. Then the rumors reach you, whispered in roadside inns and sake houses, repeated by traveling merchants and wandering monks. There is another warrior whose reputation rivals your own, a swordsman who has never known defeat, whose technique with the longsword approaches the supernatural. His name is Sasaki Kojiro, and he serves as sword instructor to the powerful Hosokawa clan on the island of Kyushu. More intriguingly, he has been asking about you, making inquiries about your whereabouts and your fighting style with the systematic thoroughness of a professional preparing for war. The prospect of finally facing a truly worthy opponent fills you with an excitement you had thought permanently extinguished. Here, at last, is the test you have been unconsciously seeking. Not another ambitious student or traditional master, but a peer, someone whose skills may actually exceed your own. The thought both thrills and terrifies you in ways that no conventional danger ever could. For the first time in years, you feel fully alive. Kojiro's reputation is built around his mastery of the nodachi, a sword longer than any conventional katana. Requiring tremendous strength and precision to wield effectively, his signature technique, the turning swallow cut, is said to be capable of killing 3 men with a single stroke, or splitting a bird in flight without disturbing the formation of its companions. More importantly, he has developed this technique through decades of meditation and practice, refining it to a degree of perfection that approaches art. You spend months preparing for the inevitable confrontation, studying everything you can learn about Kojiro's methods and philosophy. Unlike your usual improvisational approach to combat, this encounter requires careful planning, systematic analysis of an opponent whose abilities may equal or exceed your own. You practice new combinations with your twin swords, explore techniques you have never needed in actual battle, push your body and mind to limits they have never before been required to reach. The formal challenge comes through intermediaries, as befits an encounter of such significance. Hosokawa Tadatoshi, Kojiro's patron, acts as his representative in negotiations that stretch over several weeks. Every detail must be perfect. The location, the weapons, the timing, even the positioning of witnesses. This is not merely a duel, but a ceremony, a ritual that will determine not just who lives and who dies, but which approach to swordsmanship represents the pinnacle of martial achievement. The chosen location is Ganryu Island, a small spit of land in the straits between Honshu and Kyushu. It is appropriately symbolic, isolated, surrounded by treacherous currents, accessible only by boat. The island's name will become forever associated with what transpires there, transformed from a simple geographical designation into a synonym for the ultimate test of martial skill. Picture yourself now on the morning of April 13th, 1612, sitting in the bow of a fishing boat as it cuts through choppy waters toward your destiny. The weather is overcast, the sea grey and restless under a sky that promises rain before the day is over. Your swords rest in their scabbards, but your hands are busy with a different task, carving a wooden practice sword from an oar you have borrowed from the boat's owner. This is psychological warfare of the most sophisticated kind. By arriving with an improvised weapon instead of steel, you are sending Kojiro a message about your confidence, your belief that even a piece of carved wood will be sufficient to defeat his legendary technique. But there is practical calculation behind the gesture as well. The wooden sword is longer than either of your steel blades, giving you reach that may prove crucial against an opponent who has built his entire fighting style around the advantage of superior length. The boat's captain is nervous, clearly uncomfortable with his role in what everyone understands may be a historic event. "Are you certain about this, Musashi-san?" he asks, using the honorific with the careful respect due to someone whose reputation has grown beyond the merely human. Kojiro has never been defeated. Some say he is blessed by the kami themselves. You continue carving, your movements steady and precise despite the boat's motion. "Every man can be defeated," you reply without looking up from your work. The trick is understanding how. Ganryu Island comes into view as you round a rocky point, its beaches already occupied by official witnesses from both sides. You can see Kojiro waiting in the center of the small clearing that will serve as your fighting ground, his famous no-dachi held with casual grace despite its enormous length. He is younger than you expected. Perhaps 25 to your 30, with the lean build and predatory alertness of a natural killer. This is not going to be easy. As your boat approaches the beach, you notice that you are deliberately arriving late. Another calculated insult designed to unsettle your opponent's mental state. Punctuality is considered a cardinal virtue among samurai, and your tardiness will be interpreted as either supreme confidence or profound disrespect. Both interpretations serve your purposes. You wade ashore through the shallows, your improvised wooden sword held casually at your side, your expression calm and slightly distracted, as if this were nothing more than a morning training session. The assembled witnesses, perhaps 20 men representing the interests of both fighters, watch in tense silence as you and Kojiro approach each other across the sand. The formal courtesies are brief. Both fighters bow with the precise depth required by protocol, acknowledge the witnesses, and draw their weapons. Kojiro's nodachi gleams like captured sunlight, its incredible length making it seem less like a sword than a steel serpent waiting to strike. Your wooden weapon looks crude by comparison, a farmer's tool pressed into service against a masterwork of the swordsmith's art. But appearances, as you have learned through decades of combat, can be fatally deceiving. The duel begins with the traditional exchange of challenges and formal declarations of intent. Then, without further ceremony, both fighters settle into their preferred stances. Kojiro holds his massive sword above his head, in the classical position known as fire and stones, its point aimed at your heart, like the finger of an accusing god. You adopt a more unconventional posture, your wooden blade held low and angled, your body turned to present the smallest possible target. For long moments, nothing happens. Both fighters circle each other like hunting cats, searching for the perfect opening, the ideal moment when attack will overwhelm defense. This is the most dangerous phase of any duel between masters, the period when the slightest miscalculation can mean instant death, when the difference between victory and defeat is measured in fractions of seconds and angles of approach too small for ordinary eyes to detect. The attack, when it comes, is launched simultaneously by both fighters, as if some invisible signal has been given. Kojiro's nodachi descends in the legendary turning swallow cut, a technique perfected through decades of practice, designed to bisect an opponent from shoulder to hip with irresistible force. It is beautiful in its perfection, terrible in its lethality, the culmination of everything traditional Japanese swordsmanship has been evolving toward for centuries. But you are no longer bound by traditional limitations. As Kojiro's blade descends, You step not backward or to the side, but directly forward, inside the arc of his swing, bringing your wooden sword up in a rising strike aimed at his head. It is a move that violates every principle of classical combat, a technique that should result in your instant death as his superior weapon cleaves through your body. Instead, it achieves something miraculous. Your wooden blade strikes Kojiro in the temple an instant before his steel can complete its deadly arc. The impact resonates across the beach like thunder, the sound of wood against bone echoing off the surrounding rocks. Kojiro staggers, his perfect technique disrupted at the crucial moment, his legendary sword missing your shoulder by mere inches as he falls. You stand over his body, breathing hard, your improvised weapon still trembling from the impact. Kojiro lies motionless on the sand, his eyes staring sightlessly at the overcast sky, his magnificent sword half buried in the beach beside him. The greatest duel in the history of Japanese swordsmanship has lasted perhaps 10 seconds of actual combat, ending with the death of a legend and the birth of another. The witnesses approach in stunned silence, barely able to comprehend what they have observed. The undefeated Kojiro, master of the turning swallow cut, peer of the realm in martial skill, has been killed by a piece of carved wood wielded by a ronin whose techniques violate every principle of orthodox swordsmanship. It seems impossible, a violation of natural law so profound that reality itself appears to have bent around your will. But as you walk back toward the waiting boat, leaving Kojiro's body for his retainers to collect, you feel not triumph but a strange emptiness. You have achieved what you set out to accomplish, have proven beyond question that your innovations represent genuine advancement in the art of combat. Yet victory brings with it an unexpected melancholy, the realization that you may have just killed the last opponent truly worthy of your skills. The journey back to the mainland passes in contemplative silence. The boat's captain gives you a wide berth, clearly awed by what he has witnessed, unsure how to behave in the presence of someone who has just accomplished the impossible. You sit in the bow, watching the island disappear behind you, wondering what comes next for a warrior who has run out of worthy enemies. You are 30 years old, undefeated in over 60 duels, the most feared swordsman in Japan. You have transcended every limitation that flesh and skill can overcome, have proven that individual excellence can triumph over any obstacle. But as Ganryu Island fades into the mist behind you, you find yourself facing a question that victory cannot answer. What is the purpose of perfect technique in a world that no longer requires it? The greatest chapter of your legend has been written in blood on a beach that will remember this day forever. But the story is far from over. The death of Sasaki Kojiro marks the end of one journey and the beginning of another far more difficult to navigate. You return to the mainland as something unprecedented in Japanese history, a warrior who has definitively proven his superiority over every conceivable opponent, a swordsman without peer who faces the peculiar challenge of having nothing left to prove. The victory on Ganryu Island has elevated you beyond mere martial excellence into the realm of myth. But myths, you are discovering, make for lonely companions. The years immediately following Kojiro's defeat pass in a haze of spiritual crisis that threatens to destroy you more completely than any enemy's blade ever could. You wander Japan's roads like a ghost, haunting its own legend, challenged constantly by ambitious fighters who seek to build their reputations on your defeat, but finding no satisfaction in victories that have become as routine as sunrise. Each duel ends the same way. Another broken body left behind. Another empty triumph that brings you no closer to understanding what your life is supposed to mean now that you have achieved everything martial skill can accomplish. The psychological toll of constant violence begins to manifest in ways you never anticipated. You find yourself questioning not just your methods, but your fundamental understanding of what it means to be a warrior. The techniques that once brought you joy now feel mechanical, perfunctory gestures performed by rote rather than expressions of genuine martial artistry. You have become a killing machine so efficient that combat no longer challenges you. a master of death who finds no meaning in life. It is during this dark period that you begin to glimpse possibilities beyond the narrow confines of swordsmanship. Walking through a mountain village in the province of Yamato, you encounter an elderly Buddhist monk who does not recognize your name or reputation. To him, you are simply another travel-worn ronin seeking shelter for the night. The conversation that develops over a simple meal of rice and vegetables becomes the first genuine exchange you have had with another human being in months. You carry yourself like a warrior, the monk observes, studying your face in the flickering candlelight, but your eyes hold the emptiness of one who has lost his way. The statement strikes you with unexpected force. Here, finally, is someone who sees beyond your reputation to the fundamental confusion that has been eating at your soul. I have mastered my art, you reply carefully. There are no enemies left for me to face. And so you believe your journey is complete. I don't know what comes next. The monk nods with the satisfied expression of a teacher whose student has finally asked the right question. The warrior's path does not end with the perfection of technique. It begins there. True mastery lies not in the ability to destroy enemies, but in the wisdom to understand when destruction is necessary and when it is not. Picture yourself now in the months that follow that encounter, slowly beginning to see your martial skills not as an end in themselves, but as tools for exploring deeper questions about the nature of existence. You start to study subjects that have nothing to do with combat. Poetry, painting, the subtle art of tea ceremony. Your hands, so quick to draw steel, learn to hold brush and ink with equal precision. Your mind, trained to analyze opponents' weaknesses, begins to contemplate the philosophical underpinnings of strategy and conflict. This intellectual awakening attracts the attention of cultured observers who have watched your career with fascination. Chief among them is Hosokawa Tadatoshi, the same daimyo who once patronized Kojiro, but who now recognizes that your evolution beyond pure martial skill represents something unprecedented in Japanese culture. He offers you a position that would have seemed impossible just years earlier, not as a mere sword instructor or bodyguard, but as a strategic advisor whose insights into conflict and competition might have applications far beyond the battlefield. The transition from wandering ronin to respected member of civilized society proves more difficult than any physical challenge you have ever faced. The Hosokawa compound in Kumamoto represents everything you have spent decades avoiding. Hierarchy, protocol, the complex web of obligations and relationships that govern life among the upper classes. But it also offers something you have never experienced: the opportunity to test your ideas about strategy and competition in contexts that don't require anyone to die. Your first major contribution to the Hosokawa clan's affairs comes during a complex commercial dispute with rival merchants from Osaka. Traditional approaches to such conflicts involved either lengthy legal proceedings or the implied threat of violence. Instead, you propose a strategy based on principles derived from single combat. The importance of timing, the value of misdirection, the psychological advantage gained by doing the unexpected. The resolution, achieved through a series of calculated moves that leave the opposition confused and demoralized, establishes your reputation as something more than merely a skilled killer. But even as you begin to find new applications for your hard-won wisdom, the world around you continues to change in ways that make your original calling increasingly irrelevant. The Tokugawa peace deepens with each passing year, transforming Japan from a collection of warring territories into a unified nation where internal conflict becomes virtually impossible. The samurai class, deprived of wars to fight, begins its slow transformation from warrior aristocracy into bureaucratic administrators. The age of the sword is ending, replaced by an era where the pen truly proves mightier than the blade. This transformation reaches its climax during the Shimabara Rebellion of 1637–38, the last major conflict of the early Edo period. Christian peasants in Kyushu, driven to desperation by crushing taxation and religious persecution, rise in revolt against the Tokugawa government. The rebellion attracts masterless samurai from across Japan, men who see in this uprising a chance to recapture the glory of their warrior heritage. At 53, you find yourself drawn into the conflict not as a participant, but as an observer, curious to see how warfare itself has evolved during the decades of peace. What you witness at Shimabara horrifies and fascinates you in equal measure. The rebels, led by a charismatic 16-year-old named Amakusa Shiro, have fortified themselves in an ancient castle that they transform into a symbol of resistance against oppression. The government response is overwhelming. Over 125,000 troops, equipped with the latest firearms and artillery, supported by Dutch naval vessels whose cannons can reduce stone walls to rubble. This is no longer the war you remember from your youth, where individual skill and courage could determine outcomes. This is industrial killing, warfare reduced to a matter of logistics and firepower. You watch from the government lines as the siege develops, noting how modern military tactics render traditional martial skills almost completely irrelevant. The rebels fight with desperate courage, their swords and spears pitted against muskets and cannons, their individual heroism meaningless against the inexorable mathematics of superior force. When the castle finally falls after months of bombardment, the slaughter that follows marks the definitive end of an era you have spent your entire life mastering. Standing among the ruins of Shimabara Castle, surrounded by the bodies of men and women who died for beliefs they could not abandon, you finally understand what the Buddhist monk was trying to tell you years earlier. The warrior's path does not end with the perfection of technique, because technique itself is merely a tool for understanding deeper truths about the nature of conflict and resolution. Your mastery of swordsmanship was never the destination. It was the means of developing insights that transcend the narrow realm of physical combat. The revelation transforms your understanding of everything you have accomplished. The duels, the victories, the years of wandering and fighting, all of it has been preparation for this moment of clarity when you realize that true mastery lies not in the ability to kill, but in the wisdom to understand when killing is necessary and when it is counterproductive. Your skills with blade and strategy remain intact, but they are no longer the central focus of your existence. They have become tools in service of a larger purpose that you are only beginning to comprehend. You return to Kumamoto, changed in ways that your associates immediately recognize. The restless energy that once drove you from challenge to challenge has been replaced by a calmer, more focused intensity. You begin to write, setting down your thoughts about strategy and conflict in carefully crafted essays that explore the philosophical implications of your martial experiences. These early works attract attention from scholars and warriors alike, men who recognize that you are attempting something unprecedented, the systematic articulation of principles that govern all forms of competition and conflict. Your writing becomes increasingly sophisticated as you delve deeper into questions that have no simple answers. How does one distinguish between necessary violence and mere brutality? What role does deception play in honorable conflict? How can the insights gained through life and death struggles be applied to the mundane challenges of daily existence? These are not merely academic questions for you, they are attempts to understand the meaning of a life spent in the pursuit of perfect lethality. The students who begin to seek you out during this period are different from those who once wanted to learn your sword techniques. These new disciples are drawn by your reputation as a strategist and philosopher. Men who understand that your real innovations lie not in the realm of physical technique, but in the area of strategic thinking. You teach them not just how to fight, but how to think about conflict in all its manifestations. How to apply the lessons learned in single combat to the complex challenges of business, politics, and personal relationships. One of your most promising students during this period is Terao Magonojo, the same earnest young samurai who sought you out years earlier, but who has now evolved into a sophisticated thinker in his own right. Under your guidance, he begins to understand that swordsmanship is not merely about the mechanical manipulation of weapons, but about the development of mental qualities, timing, distance, psychology, that have applications far beyond physical combat. Master, he asks you one evening, As you both sit in the garden of the Hosokawa compound, how does one know when they have truly understood the way of strategy? You consider the question while watching koi swim in lazy circles through the ornamental pond. These fish have no enemies in their artificial environment, no challenges that require them to develop the skills their ancestors needed for survival in wild waters. Yet they retain the grace and alertness that once served more serious purposes. Perhaps there is a lesson in their example. When you no longer need to think about strategy, you finally answer. When the principles become so natural that they guide your actions without conscious effort. When you can apply the lessons learned through conflict to the pursuit of harmony. It is during this period of intensive reflection and teaching that you begin to conceive of your masterwork, a systematic exploration of strategy and conflict that will distill everything you have learned into a form that others can understand and apply. The book will be called Go-Rin no Sho, the Book of Five Rings, and it will represent the culmination of a lifetime spent exploring the deepest mysteries of human competition and cooperation. But first, there are other lessons to learn, other challenges to face. Your transformation from warrior to philosopher is not yet complete, and the path ahead leads through territories more dangerous than any physical battlefield you have ever walked. The enemy you must now confront is not another swordsman, but something far more formidable: the limitations of your own understanding, the boundaries of human wisdom itself. Your greatest battles still lie ahead. The decade of the 1640s finds you settled into a rhythm of life that would have been unimaginable during your years as a wandering warrior. The Hosokawa compound has become more than just shelter. It is a laboratory where you conduct experiments in the application of martial principles to civilian challenges. A school where carefully selected students learn to think strategically about every aspect of human endeavor. Your reputation has evolved far beyond mere skill, with weapons to encompass something more rare and valuable. Genuine wisdom earned through a lifetime of testing ideas against the ultimate standard of life and death competition. Your daily routine reflects this transformation. Dawn finds you not in combat training, but in meditation, sitting motionless in the compound's garden while your mind works through complex problems of strategy and implementation. The physical disciplines that once consumed your existence have been reduced to maintenance activities. Enough practice to keep your reflexes sharp, but no longer the obsessive pursuit of perfect technique that characterized your younger years. Your body, scarred by decades of combat, has begun to show its age, but your mind has never been more powerful or more focused. The students who gather around you during this period represent the finest strategic thinkers of their generation. They come not to learn sword techniques, but to understand how the principles that govern armed conflict can be applied to the challenges of politics, commerce, and personal development. Your teaching method, developed through years of trial and error, focuses on case studies drawn from your own experiences, real situations where strategic thinking made the difference between success and failure, life and death. Strategy, you tell them during one of these sessions, is not about following predetermined rules, but about understanding principles that can be adapted to any situation. The techniques I used to defeat Kojiro at Ganryu Island were not sword moves, but applications of timing, distance, and psychology that could have worked equally well in a commercial negotiation or a diplomatic encounter. One of your students, a young merchant's son named Iori, raises his hand. But master, how does one know which principles to apply in any given situation? The question touches on something you have been thinking about for years. The meta-strategy that governs the selection and application of strategic approaches. Experience, you reply, and the willingness to test your ideas against reality rather than theory. Most people fail not because their strategies are wrong, but because they never subject them to genuine testing. It is during this period of intensive teaching that you begin to recognize patterns in your own thinking, recurring themes that connect seemingly disparate aspects of strategy and conflict. These insights form the foundation of the work that will become your masterpiece. A systematic exploration of strategic principles organized around the classical elements of earth, water, fire, wind, and void that have shaped Japanese philosophical thinking for centuries. Picture yourself now in the quiet hours before dawn, brush in hand, working by candlelight on the manuscript that will distill everything you have learned into a form that future generations can understand and apply. The writing comes slowly, each character chosen with the same precision you once brought to sword techniques. Each concept tested against your memories of actual combat and real-world application. The Book of Earth, your foundation chapter, explores the fundamental principles that underlie all strategic thinking. Here you examine the importance of understanding yourself and your environment, the necessity of continuous learning and adaptation, the danger of becoming too attached to any single approach or technique. These seem like simple ideas, but you know from experience how difficult they can be to implement when lives depend on making the right choice in the space between heartbeats. The Book of Water delves into the mental aspects of strategy, the psychological techniques that allow a warrior to remain calm and focused under extreme pressure, the methods for reading an opponent's intentions and emotional state, the subtle art of controlling timing and distance to create advantages that exist only in the mind. This is perhaps the most personal section of your work, drawn directly from decades of facing enemies who wanted nothing more than to kill you as efficiently as possible. Your pen moves across the paper with fluid strokes as you write. You must understand that there is more than one way to perceive the world. You must have both consciously adopted a strategy and be aware that you have done so. You must accept that there are things you know that you don't know you know, and that many of the things you think you know may be wrong. The Book of Fire examines combat itself, not the mechanical aspects of technique, but the strategic principles that govern all forms of conflict. Here you explore concepts like the importance of initiative, the value of adaptability over rigid planning, the way that superior strategy can overcome superior resources. These lessons, learned through mortal combat, apply equally well to business competition, political maneuvering, or any other situation where opposing forces vie for advantage. As you work through these sections, memories surface unbidden. The moment at Ganryu Island, when you realized that Kojiro's perfect technique could be defeated by violating the assumptions upon which it was based. The desperate fight against the Yoshioka school, when you discovered that multiple opponents create different strategic requirements than single combat. The gradual understanding that individual excellence means nothing without the wisdom to know when and how to apply it. The Book of Wind represents your most systematic critique of orthodox martial thinking, an analysis of why traditional approaches to strategy and conflict often fail when tested against innovative opponents. This section draws heavily on your experiences, challenging established schools and masters. Your observations of how institutional thinking can become rigid and predictable. Your understanding that true mastery requires the ability to transcend the limitations of any single approach or philosophy. Writing this section proves emotionally challenging in ways you did not anticipate. Many of the men you defeated and killed were genuinely skilled warriors operating according to principles they believed were correct. Their failure was not lack of ability, but lack of flexibility, an unwillingness to question assumptions that had served previous generations well, but were inadequate for the challenges they faced. There is tragedy in such defeats, a waste of human potential that strategy alone cannot prevent. The final section, the Book of Void, attempts to explore the most elusive aspects of strategic thinking, the intuitive understanding that transcends conscious analysis, the ability to perceive patterns and opportunities that cannot be reduced to systematic rules. This is the hardest section to write because it deals with concepts that exist at the very edge of language, insights that can be experienced but not easily communicated. You pause in your writing, staring at the blank paper before you, searching for words to describe something that may be fundamentally indescribable. How do you explain the moment of perfect clarity that comes in the midst of mortal combat, when time seems to slow and every possible outcome becomes visible simultaneously? How do you teach someone to recognize the instant when all strategic considerations resolve into a single, inevitable course of action. The void, you finally write, is not emptiness, but fullness, the state of mind that contains all possibilities while being committed to none until the moment of action arrives. It is the source from which all strategy emerges, and to which all technique must ultimately return. The work consumes you for months, demanding a level of intellectual rigor that proves as challenging as any physical opponent you ever faced. Each concept must be examined from multiple angles, tested against your memories of actual application, refined until it captures not just what happened, but why it happened, and how the underlying principles might be applied in different circumstances. This is not merely a manual of sword techniques, but an attempt to create a comprehensive theory of strategic thinking that will remain valid regardless of how warfare and competition evolve. Your students notice the change in you during this period of intensive writing. The man who once moved through the world with the predatory alertness of a hunting cat has become contemplative, almost scholarly in his approach to daily challenges. You still practice with your swords each morning, but the movements have taken on a meditative quality that suggests you are working through ideas as much as maintaining physical conditioning. The Shimabara rebellion erupts during the final stages of your manuscript preparation, providing you with an opportunity to observe modern warfare while your thoughts about strategy are still crystallizing on paper. What you witness there, the systematic application of overwhelming force, the reduction of individual heroism to statistical insignificance, the triumph of logistics over personal valor, confirms many of the ideas you have been developing about the evolution of conflict and competition. Standing in the ruins of the rebel stronghold, surrounded by the bodies of men who died for beliefs that superior strategy and resources rendered irrelevant, you understand that you are documenting the end of an era as much as analyzing its principles. The age of the individual warrior, the time when personal skill and courage could determine outcomes, is passing away forever. Your book will serve not just as a guide to strategic thinking, but as a monument to a way of life that is becoming increasingly obsolete. Yet this realization does not diminish your enthusiasm for the project, but rather adds urgency to it. If the specific techniques of swordsmanship are becoming irrelevant, the underlying principles that govern all forms of competition and conflict remain as valid as ever. The businessman negotiating a contract faces the same fundamental challenges as the warrior preparing for single combat. The need to understand his opponent, the importance of timing and positioning, the value of maintaining flexibility while pursuing clear objectives. The writing takes on new dimensions as you begin to explore these broader applications. Military strategy, commercial competition, political maneuvering, even personal relationships, all can be understood as variations on themes you first encountered in life and death duels. The principles that allowed you to defeat Kojiro at Ganryu Island are the same ones that enable successful negotiation, effective leadership, and harmonious human interaction. Violence was merely the laboratory where you learned lessons that apply to every aspect of human endeavor. Your manuscript grows to encompass not just the technical aspects of strategy, but the philosophical foundations upon which all strategic thinking must rest. You write about the importance of continuous learning, the danger of becoming attached to any single approach, the necessity of adapting methods to circumstances rather than forcing circumstances to conform to preferred methods. These ideas, tested in the crucible of mortal combat, offer insights that extend far beyond the narrow realm of military affairs. The work nears completion as you enter your 60th year, your body increasingly betraying the accumulated damage of decades spent in violent pursuit of perfection. Your joints ache with old wounds, your reflexes have slowed imperceptibly but measurably. Your endurance is no longer what it once was. Yet your mind has never been clearer or more focused. Age has brought the gift of perspective, the ability to see patterns and connections that were invisible during the intensity of your younger years. One evening, as you put the finishing touches on a particularly complex passage about the relationship between technique and strategy, Terao Magonojo approaches with a question that has been troubling him for months. "Master," he says, settling onto the mat beside your writing desk, "why is this book so important to you?" Your reputation is already secure. Your place in history is assured. Why spend your remaining years on something that most people will never understand or appreciate? You set down your brush and consider the question, watching the last light of day fade from the garden beyond your window. The koi in the ornamental pond continue their endless circling, their movements following patterns established by generations of their ancestors, beautiful and purposeful despite their artificial environment. Because understanding is more important than reputation, you finally reply. I have spent my life learning lessons that died with me would benefit no one. The techniques I developed, the insights I gained, the principles I discovered, these things have value that transcends my personal glory or failure. But will anyone be able to learn from your words what you learned through experience? The question touches on your deepest fear about the entire project. Can strategic wisdom really be communicated through language, or is it something that can only be acquired through direct experience? You have struggled with this problem throughout the writing process, knowing that your most important insights came not through intellectual analysis, but through the immediate, visceral understanding that emerges in moments of extreme crisis. Perhaps not completely, you admit. But if even a few readers grasp the underlying principles, if some future strategist builds upon these foundations to develop ideas I never imagined, then the effort will have been worthwhile. Knowledge grows through accumulation and refinement, not through the isolated genius of individual practitioners. The Book of Five Rings is completed in the early months of 1645, representing the distillation of more than half a century spent exploring the deepest mysteries of conflict and competition. Reading through the finished manuscript, you are struck by how far you have traveled from the angry young swordsman who killed his first opponent in a dusty provincial town. That boy sought only to prove his superiority through violence. The man who has written this book understands that true victory lies not in defeating enemies, but in transcending the need for enemies altogether. Yet even as you prepare the manuscript for copying and distribution, you recognize that your own journey is not yet complete. The book represents what you have learned, not what you still have to discover. There are depths of understanding that remain unexplored, questions about the nature of existence and human purpose that cannot be answered through strategic analysis alone. Your transformation from warrior to philosopher has opened new territories of inquiry that may prove as challenging as any opponent you faced in your prime. The final challenge awaits, not another duel or strategic problem, but the ultimate test that every human being must face alone. Death approaches with the inevitability of sunrise, and you must find a way to meet it that honors everything you have learned about courage, preparation, and the acceptance of outcomes beyond your control. The way of strategy must finally be tested against the one enemy that no technique can defeat, the one battle that every warrior must eventually lose. Your masterwork is complete, but your story continues toward its inevitable conclusion. The last year of your life unfolds with the inexorable rhythm of a classical tragedy, each day bringing you closer to an appointment that no amount of skill or strategy can postpone. You are 61 years old, ancient by the standards of your violent era, yet your mind remains as sharp as the blades that have been your constant companions for more than half a century. Your body, however, tells a different story. The accumulated damage of countless duels and battles has begun to assert itself with increasing urgency. Old wounds ache with each change in weather, joints stiffened by decades of abuse, protest every movement, and there are mornings when rising from your sleeping mat requires conscious effort and careful planning. Yet there is something liberating about this physical decline, a freedom that comes from understanding that your time for earthly concerns is drawing to its natural end. The restless energy that once drove you from challenge to challenge has been replaced by a calm purposefulness that your students and associates find both inspiring and unsettling. You move through your daily routines with the measured grace of a man who has made peace with mortality, who views his approaching death not as defeat, but as the final lesson in a curriculum that has spanned a lifetime. The Book of Five Rings has been copied and distributed, already beginning to influence strategic thinkers across Japan and beyond. Letters arrive regularly from readers who have found applications for your principles in contexts you never imagined. Merchants who use your insights about timing and psychology to negotiate better deals. Administrators who apply your thoughts on leadership to the governance of provinces. Even artists who discover that your ideas about the void illuminate aspects of creative expression that cannot be captured through technique alone. These responses confirm something you have suspected for years, that the principles governing armed conflict are merely specific applications of broader truths about human nature and the structure of reality itself. Violence was the laboratory where you first encountered these concepts, but they extend far beyond the narrow realm of physical combat to encompass every aspect of human endeavor. Your transformation from swordsman to strategist to philosopher represents not a rejection of your martial past, but its natural evolution and completion. The decision to withdraw from active life comes suddenly, triggered by a minor incident that reveals the extent to which your physical capabilities have diminished. During a routine training session with one of your senior students, you find yourself unable to execute a technique that once required no conscious thought. Your hand trembles slightly as you attempt a complex sword manipulation, a tremor so slight that only you would notice it, but significant enough to signal that the time has come for the final phase of your journey. That evening, you inform Hosokawa Tadatoshi of your intention to retire to a hermitage where you can prepare for death without the distractions of social obligation or student instruction. Your patron receives the news with the mixture of sadness and understanding that befits a man who has watched many warriors age beyond their physical prime. Arrangements are made quickly and discreetly. Within a week, you have withdrawn to Reigando, a cave in the mountains outside Kumamoto, where generations of holy men have sought enlightenment through solitude and meditation. Picture yourself now in that final refuge, seated cross-legged on a simple mat, in the dim light filtering through the cave's entrance. The space is austere to the point of severity. A few personal possessions, writing materials, basic provisions for sustenance, nothing more. This is where you will spend your remaining days, stripped of all external supports and distractions, alone with your thoughts and the approaching certainty of death. The cave becomes a laboratory for the final experiments of your life, not tests of physical technique, but explorations of consciousness itself. You spend long hours in meditation, examining the nature of your own mind with the same systematic thoroughness you once brought to the analysis of opponents' fighting styles. What you discover is both humbling and enlightening. That self-knowledge is perhaps the most elusive and important form of mastery, requiring a lifetime of study yet never fully completed. Your daily routine in the cave follows patterns established through decades of disciplined living. You rise before dawn and begin with physical exercises. Modified versions of the sword forms that once consumed your existence, now performed slowly and meditatively as a form of moving meditation. The movements have lost their martial purpose but retained their essential beauty, becoming a kind of prayer offered to the mountain spirits and the memory of all the opponents who helped teach you these lessons. The bulk of each day is devoted to writing, not another book, but a series of personal reflections on the meaning of the journey you have taken from violent youth to philosophical maturity. These writings, later compiled as the Dokodo, or Way of Walking Alone, represent your most personal thoughts about how to live with integrity and purpose in a world that seems increasingly disconnected from the values that shaped your generation. Accept everything just the way it is, you write on one of these final pages. Do not seek pleasure for its own sake. Do not, under any circumstances, depend on a partial feeling. Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. Be detached from desire your whole life long. These maxims, distilled from more than 6 decades of experience, reveal how far you have traveled from the angry young man who once measured his worth by the number of enemies he could defeat. The path of the warrior has led, improbably but inevitably, to insights that transcend violence entirely. to an understanding that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to know when destruction is necessary and when it merely reflects the limitations of the destroyer. The writing becomes increasingly urgent as your physical condition deteriorates. You can feel death approaching like a familiar opponent, someone you have glimpsed many times in the eyes of defeated enemies but never faced directly yourself. There is no fear in this recognition, only a professional interest in how this final duel will unfold. Death, you realize, is simply the ultimate strategic challenge, an opponent that cannot be defeated but might be met with dignity and understanding. Your final essay, completed just days before your death, attempts to articulate the most important lesson you have learned during your time in the cave. The way of strategy, you write, is the way of nature. When you appreciate the power and strength of nature, knowing the rhythm of any situation, you will be able to hit the enemy naturally and strike naturally. All this is the way of the void. The void, that concept you have struggled to define throughout your philosophical writings, finally reveals its true meaning as you approach the threshold of your own extinction. It is not emptiness, but fullness. Not the absence of content, but the presence of infinite possibility. It is the source from which all strategy emerges and to which all technique must ultimately return. It is the space between thoughts, the pause between heartbeats, the moment of perfect balance that precedes all decisive action. On June 13th, 1645, you sense that the final encounter has arrived. Your body, weakened by age and ascetic living, can no longer sustain the consciousness that has been your constant companion for more than 60 years. You arrange yourself in formal sitting position, your swords placed carefully beside you, your writing materials organized with the precision of a lifetime spent in disciplined practice. The last meditation begins as the sun sets behind the mountains, painting the cave's interior in shades of gold and crimson that remind you of the armor you once wore into battle. You close your eyes and focus on the rhythm of your breathing, feeling each exhale carry away another piece of the self you have spent so many years constructing and refining. There is no struggle in this dissolution, no desperate attempt to cling to existence. Death, you have finally understood, is not the opposite of life, but its culmination. The moment when all partial insights resolve into complete understanding. Your consciousness begins to fade as the night deepens, but there is a clarity in this diminishment that surpasses anything you experienced during your years of apparent strength and vitality. The boundaries between self and world, between observer and observed, begin to dissolve until only awareness remains. Pure, undifferentiated consciousness that encompasses everything and belongs to nothing. In your final moments, you understand that the journey from violence to wisdom has been necessary but not unique. Every human being who lives consciously and purposefully must eventually traverse the same territory, must move from the illusion of separation to the reality of connection, from the desire to control to the acceptance of what is. Your particular path happened to lead through the realm of mortal combat, but the destination is the same for everyone who has the courage to complete the journey. The sun rises on June 14th, 1645, illuminating the body of Japan's greatest swordsman sitting in perfect meditation posture, his face serene in death, his hands arranged in the mudra of one who has achieved final understanding. Miyamoto Musashi is gone, but the principles he discovered and articulated will influence strategic thinking for centuries to come. The way of the sword has been transformed into the way of wisdom, and that transformation will outlast all the battles and victories that first brought him fame. Your students arrive later that morning to find not a corpse, but a monument, the physical remains of a man who achieved something unprecedented in the history of martial arts. You manage to follow the warrior's path to its ultimate conclusion, transforming the skills learned in violent competition into insights that transcend violence entirely. The boy who began by learning to kill became a man who finally understood when killing was necessary and when it was not, who discovered that true mastery lies not in defeating enemies, but in transcending the need for enemies altogether. In the years that follow, your legend will grow in ways you never could have anticipated. The Book of Five Rings will be translated into dozens of languages, studied by generals and business executives, analyzed by philosophers and psychologists. Your techniques of swordsmanship will be preserved and practiced, but more importantly, your approach to strategic thinking will influence fields you never imagined, from modern management theory to contemporary psychology. But perhaps the most important legacy you leave behind is the example of transformation itself, the proof that it is possible to begin with the darkest human impulses and, through discipline and reflection, transmute them into wisdom that serves all of humanity. The way of the warrior, properly understood and fully realized, becomes the way of the sage violence. Consciously embraced and then consciously transcended, leads to peace. Your final cut was not made with steel, but with understanding, severing the illusions that separate human beings from their own deepest nature. In death, you achieved what you sought in life: perfect technique applied with flawless timing to achieve an outcome that benefits not just yourself, but everyone capable of learning from your example. The cave falls silent, but the echo of your insights will resonate through the centuries, inspiring countless others to begin their own journeys from conflict to understanding, from technique to wisdom, from the way of the sword to the way of peace. The story of Miyamoto Musashi ends with his death in a mountain cave, but the influence of his ideas has only just begun. In the centuries that follow his final meditation, the principles he developed through mortal combat will find applications in contexts he never could have imagined, proving that genuine wisdom transcends the particular circumstances of its discovery to become universally relevant insight into the nature of human conflict and cooperation. Modern Japan, transformed by industrialization and international engagement, still reveres the memory of the greatest swordsman who ever lived. Business executives study the Book of Five Rings for insights into competitive strategy. Military leaders analyze his tactical innovations for lessons about asymmetric warfare. Philosophers examine his transformation from warrior to sage as a model for personal development that remains relevant in any era. But perhaps most importantly, Musashi's example demonstrates that it is possible to begin with humanity's darkest impulses: the desire to dominate, to destroy, to prove superiority through violence, and transform them into something that serves the highest purposes of civilization. His journey from angry farm boy to legendary warrior to wise philosopher shows that no starting point is too humble or too violent to prevent the eventual achievement of genuine understanding. The way of the sword, properly followed, leads away from the sword itself toward principles that apply to every aspect of human endeavor. The techniques that once served only to kill became tools for understanding how to live with purpose, courage, and wisdom. In the end, Miyamoto Musashi proved that the ultimate victory belongs not to those who defeat the most enemies, but to those who transform their capacity for destruction into the wisdom to know when destruction serves a higher purpose, and when it merely reflects the limitations of the destroyer. His legend lives on, not because he was undefeated in combat, but because he showed how the warrior's path, fully realized, becomes the way of peace.